Marcus Chen rubbed his tired eyes as he drove his black Toyota Camry through the empty streets of downtown Baltimore. The digital clock on his dashboard showed 11:45 p.m., and the temperature reading made him grateful for his car's heating system, a freezing 20 degrees Fahrenheit, -6 degrees Celsius. Snow was starting to fall softly, adding to his exhaustion after the 5-hour city council budget meeting. As the finance committee chairman, Marcus had spent the entire evening arguing about allocating funds for various city departments, including the police force. The meeting had been particularly tense when discussing the police department's request for increased funding for military-grade equipment. Marcus had strongly opposed it, suggesting the money would be better spent on community programs and officer training. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. Marcus was looking forward to getting home to his wife, Sarah, who had probably left his dinner in the microwave, as she always did when he worked late. His house was just 15 minutes away, and he could already imagine sinking into his comfortable armchair with a warm plate of food. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror startled him out of his thoughts. Marcus checked his speedometer. He was going exactly at the speed limit. Confused but calm, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, making sure to stop under a streetlight for visibility. His father, a former police officer himself, had taught him all the proper procedures for traffic stops. 2 officers approached his car, one on each side. Their flashlights beamed directly into his windows, making it difficult for Marcus to see their faces. The officer on the driver's side rapped sharply on his window with his knuckles, even though Marcus was already rolling it down. "License and registration," the officer demanded without any greeting. His nameplate read Brady, and his voice carried a tone that Marcus had heard too many times in his 15 years of public service, authority mixed with unnecessary aggression. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said politely, reaching slowly for his wallet. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Officer Brady's partner, whose nameplate read Thompson, shifted his position, moving his hand to rest on his holster, a subtle but clear intimidation tactic that didn't go unnoticed by Marcus. "Your right taillight is out," Brady said, though Marcus knew this wasn't true. He had just had his car serviced the previous week. "I apologize, but I believe there must be some mistake," Marcus replied calmly. "I had my car checked last week and all lights were working perfectly." The temperature seemed to drop even further as Officer Brady's demeanor changed. He straightened up, pushing his chest out in a display of authority. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his voice steady. "Officer, it's freezing outside, and I don't see any reason why—" "I said, step out of the vehicle." Brady's voice boomed through the quiet night. A few lights came on in nearby buildings, and curious residents peeked through their windows at the scene unfolding below. Marcus knew his rights, but he also knew the reality of the situation. As a city council member, he had heard numerous complaints about police misconduct, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. With deliberate movements, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened his door. The bitter cold hit him immediately. His suit jacket offered little protection against the freezing wind, and snowflakes began settling on his shoulders. His leather shoes crunched on the light dusting of snow that had accumulated on the pavement. "Hands where we can see them," Officer Thompson instructed, a flashlight beam following Marcus's every movement. Marcus raised his hand slightly, maintaining his dignity despite the humiliating situation. He noticed both officers had their body cameras turned off, a direct violation of department policy. The realization sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. What happened next would change not only Marcus's life, but the entire police department's future. However, at that moment, standing in the freezing cold with 2 aggressive officers, Marcus Chen was just another citizen facing the harsh reality of power unchecked, or so the officers thought. The city council member took a deep breath of the frigid air, his mind already racing with thoughts about tomorrow's consequences. But first, he would have to survive tonight's encounter with his dignity and possibly his safety intact. Officer Brady circled Marcus like a shark, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. The streetlight cast long shadows on the ground, and the few people watching from their windows had now pulled out their phones, recording the scene from above. "So, you think you know more than a police officer?" Brady asked, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "You want to argue about your taillight?" He was shorter than Marcus, but carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in control. Marcus stood perfectly still, his expensive suit collecting snowflakes. The wind had picked up, making the 20-degree weather feel even colder. His fingers were starting to become numb, but he kept them visible as instructed, knowing any wrong move could make the situation worse. "No, sir," Marcus replied calmly. "I simply wanted to point out that there might be a misunderstanding." His corporate training in dealing with difficult situations was proving useful, even as his teeth began to chatter. Officer Thompson, the younger of the two, kept his flashlight trained on Marcus while checking the car's interior through the windows. "Hey, Brady, this guy's got some fancy stuff in here. Custom leather seats, high-end laptop in the back." "Oh, really?" Brady's tone changed to one of mock interest. "So you're one of those rich guys who think they're above the law?" He stopped in front of Marcus, deliberately invading his personal space. The officer's face was so close that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath. A passing car slowed down to watch but quickly drove away when Brady glared in their direction. The snow was falling harder now, and Marcus's dress shoes were completely unsuitable for the weather. His feet felt like blocks of ice. "I assure you, Officer Brady, I have complete respect for the law," Marcus said, maintaining his composure. He considered showing his city council ID but decided to wait, wanting to experience exactly what ordinary citizens faced in these situations. "Prove it then," Brady said with a smirk. "Since you're so respectful, drop and give me 20 push-ups right here, right now." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Brady said, his hand resting casually on his taser. 20 push-ups. Consider it a lesson in humility, unless you prefer we search your vehicle for anything illegal." Officer Thompson chuckled, already pulling out his personal phone to record. The threat was clear. Do the push-ups or face worse consequences. Marcus looked at the wet, freezing pavement, then at the officers' badges, memorizing their numbers. "The ground is frozen," Marcus said quietly, "and this is hardly standard procedure for a traffic stop." Brady stepped even closer. "Oh, now you're an expert on police procedures too? Make it 30 push-ups, and every time you complain, I'll add 10 more." Marcus could see his car's exhaust creating warm clouds in the cold air, a reminder of the comfort he'd been in just minutes ago. More lights had come on in the surrounding buildings, and more phones were recording from windows above. The whole scene was being documented, though the officers seemed either unaware or unconcerned. Slowly, Marcus got down on the ground. The freezing pavement immediately soaked through his suit pants at the knees. He placed his hands on the wet ground, the cold biting into his palms like needles. His wedding ring clinked against the frozen concrete. "Count them out loud," Brady ordered, clearly enjoying his power trip. "And make sure they're proper push-ups. No half measures here." Marcus began the push-ups, his voice steady despite the humiliation. 1, 2, 3. Each time his chest lowered toward the frozen ground, his tie would drag through the slush. His expensive suit, which had impressed the city council just hours ago, was getting ruined. Officer Thompson walked around him, recording everything on his phone while adding his own commentary. "This is what happens when people don't respect authority," he said to the camera, laughing. What neither officer noticed was Marcus's wallet slowly sliding out of his breast pocket as he continued the push-ups. It would fall open in just a few moments, revealing his city council ID and changing the entire dynamic of this cold winter night. But for now, Marcus kept counting, his arms shaking from both the cold and exertion, as he experienced firsthand the abuse of power he'd heard about so many times in council meetings. The night was about to take an unexpected turn, and tomorrow would bring changes that neither Officer Brady nor Thompson could imagine. 28, 29, 30. Marcus counted the final push-ups, his arms trembling from the cold and effort. His once pristine navy suit was now soaked through from the snow and slush. Small pieces of gravel had dug into his palms, leaving painful indentations. The officer walked around him, boots deliberately splashing dirty snow near Marcus's face. "Not bad for a fancy boy," he taunted, while Officer Thompson continued filming on his phone, snickering at his partner's comments. As Marcus started to push himself up from the frozen ground, something fell from his breast pocket. His leather wallet hit the wet pavement with a soft thud, flipping open as it landed. The gold city council seal caught the streetlight, gleaming bright enough to catch Officer Thompson's attention. Brady." Thompson's voice suddenly lost its mocking tone. He lowered his phone and stepped closer to the wallet, shining his flashlight on the ID card. "You might want to see this." Brady stopped his pacing and looked down. His face, previously filled with arrogance, drained of color as he read the ID. Marcus Chen, City Council Member, Chairman of the Police Oversight Committee. The change in the officer's behavior was immediate and dramatic. Brady quickly bent down, trying to help Marcus up. "Sir, I am so sorry. We had no idea who you were. Please let me help you." Marcus stood up slowly on his own, his legs stiff from the cold. His suit was ruined, wet patches on the knees and elbows, tie dripping with dirty slush, and small tears in the fabric from the rough pavement. He reached down and picked up his wallet, brushing off the snow with deliberate calmness. "Officer Thompson," Marcus said quietly, looking at the younger cop, who was now frantically trying to delete the video from his phone. "I wouldn't delete that if I were you. Destroying evidence is a serious offense." Thompson's hand froze over his phone screen. Both officers stood in uncomfortable silence as Marcus brushed off his suit as best he could. The snow continued to fall around them, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone knew it. "Sir, please understand," Brady started, his voice now almost apologetic. "This was just a routine traffic stop that got a bit out of hand. We meant no disrespect." Marcus turned to face him, his expression calm but his eyes intense. "A routine traffic stop for a tail light that isn't actually broken, with both of your body cameras conveniently turned off." The officers exchanged nervous glances. Marcus could see residents in the nearby buildings still recording everything on their phones. He had a feeling these videos would be all over social media by morning. "Mr. Chen, sir." Thompson stepped forward. "We can explain everything. Maybe we could talk about this somewhere warmer. There's a coffee shop just around the corner." "No, thank you," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a chill colder than the winter air. "I think we've had enough conversation for tonight." He walked back to his car, his shoes squishing with each step, leaving wet footprints in the snow. Before getting in, he turned to face the officers one last time. "Officers Brady and Thompson, I suggest you both prepare detailed reports about this incident. Include everything. Why you really pulled me over, why your body cameras were off, and why you thought it appropriate to make a citizen do push-ups in freezing weather during a traffic stop." The officers stood rigid, knowing their careers might be over. Brady opened his mouth to speak again, but Marcus held up his hand. "Submit those reports to my office by 9 a.m. tomorrow," he continued. And Officer Thompson, I expect the complete undeleted video from your phone to be included. Good night, gentlemen." Marcus got into his car, the warmth of the heater hitting his wet clothes. As he drove away, he watched in his rearview mirror as the two officers stood in the falling snow, looking like statues under the streetlight. They had no idea that their small power play would lead to the biggest police reform their city had ever seen. Tomorrow would be a busy day at the city council, but tonight, Marcus had experienced something that would change not just his perspective, but the entire police department's future. Sometimes, he thought, the most powerful lessons come from the most humbling experiences. The heater in Marcus's car blasted at full power, but he still couldn't stop shivering. His wet clothes clung uncomfortably to his skin, and his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the steering wheel. The clock on his dashboard now showed 12:30 a.m. As he drove through the quiet streets, memories of the last hour kept playing in his mind like a bad movie. The sound of Officer Brady's mocking laughter, the feel of the frozen pavement against his hands, and the way his tie had dragged through the dirty slush. Each detail was burned into his memory. His phone started buzzing on the passenger seat. It was probably Sarah wondering where he was, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to answer. How could he explain to his wife that her husband, a respected city council member, had been forced to do push-ups in the snow like a recruit at boot camp? At a red light, Marcus caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. His usually neat black hair was wet and messy, and his face looked older than its 45 years. Small pieces of gravel were still stuck to his suit sleeves, and a dark, wet patch spread across his chest where snow had soaked through. "Marcus Chen," he said to himself. "You just had to experience it firsthand, didn't you?" For years, he had sat through countless community meetings where people complained about police harassment. He had listened, taken notes, and promised to look into their cases. But until tonight, he had never truly understood their helplessness. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Someone had already uploaded a video of the incident to social media. Marcus watched a few seconds of the shaky footage. It showed him doing push-ups while the officers laughed. The video was gaining views by the minute. As he turned onto his street, Marcus noticed his hands had stopped shaking. The initial shock and humiliation were being replaced by something else. There, in his 15 years on the city council, he had never felt more certain about what needed to be done. He pulled into his driveway but didn't get out immediately. Instead, he reached for his briefcase and pulled out his tablet, opening his email. He began typing. "Emergency meeting notice. Police Oversight Committee time. 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. Location, Main Council Chamber agenda. Review of recent police conduct and departmental policy attendance. Mandatory." After sending the email, Marcus started making calls. First to his assistant, Mary, who answered despite the late hour. "Mary, I need every complaint filed against Officers Brady and Thompson from the last 5 years on my desk by 8 a.m. and get me the police department's body camera compliance reports for the past 6 months." Mary, used to urgent requests, didn't ask questions. "Yes, sir. Anything else?" "Yes," Marcus said, watching the snow continue to fall in his driveway. "Contact IT. I want all footage from the traffic cameras at the corner of Pine and 5th Street from 11:45 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. tonight. And Mary, thank you." Finally, Marcus called the one person he knew would understand the significance of what had happened. His father, retired police Captain James Chen. The phone rang 3 times before his father's voice, still sharp despite his 70 years, answered. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice slightly cracking. "Remember all those times you told me about how power can corrupt good officers? I just lived it." As Marcus explained what had happened, his father listened quietly. When he finished, the old captain was silent for a long moment before speaking. Son, sometimes the worst experiences make the best fuel for change. What are you going to do about it? Marcus looked at his ruined suit, then at his council badge sitting on the passenger seat. I'm going to do what should have been done years ago, Dad. Tomorrow we start cleaning house. Finally stepping out of his car, Marcus walked toward his front door. The house was dark except for the porch light Sarah always left on for him. Tomorrow would bring a storm to the police department, but tonight he needed to hold his wife, warm up, and prepare for the battle ahead. The wet footprints he left on his front porch would dry by morning, but the impact of this night would last much longer than that. At exactly 7 a.m., Marcus walked into City Hall, looking like a different man from the one who had done push-ups in the snow just hours ago. He wore his sharpest black suit, his lucky red tie, and carried a thick folder under his arm. The security guard at the entrance did a double take. Marcus was never in this early. His assistant, Mary, was already at her desk, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she had worked through the night. 5 stacks of papers were arranged neatly on her desk, along with a large coffee cup. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said, standing up. "I have everything you asked for. Officers Brady and Thompson have had 17 complaints filed against them in the past 5 years. None were properly investigated." She handed him the first stack of papers. Marcus nodded, taking the documents and the body camera footage reports. Mary picked up another stack. Interesting pattern there. Both officers reported their cameras as malfunctioning 12 times in the last 6 months. That's 4 times the department average. The office started coming alive as more staff arrived, many giving Marcus curious looks. The video of last night had gone viral. It had over 100,000 views already, and local news stations were running it on their morning shows. Marcus's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since he woke up. The police chief had called 6 times, the mayor twice, and reporters from every local news outlet were requesting comments. He had ignored them all. At 8:45 a.m., officers Brady and Thompson arrived at his office. They looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow, less intimidating. Brady's usual confidence was replaced with nervous fidgeting, and Thompson couldn't meet Marcus's eyes. "Your reports?" Marcus asked simply, holding out his hand. The officers handed over their paperwork. Their hands were shaking slightly, very different from last night when they had been so bold in the cold. "Sir," Brady started, "about last night." Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it for the committee meeting. That's in 45 minutes. I suggest you both go prepare." After they left, Marcus read their reports. As expected, both officers tried to downplay the incident. Brady claimed he was conducting a standard field sobriety test, while Thompson wrote that Marcus had volunteered to do the exercises. At 9:25 a.m., Marcus walked into the main council chamber. The room was packed. All committee members were present, along with dozens of citizens who had heard about the emergency meeting. Local news cameras lined the back wall. The police chief sat in the front row, his face red with anger or embarrassment, possibly both. Officers Brady and Thompson sat nearby, now in full-dress uniforms, looking uncomfortable. Marcus took his place at the center of the committee table. He arranged the documents in front of him, the complaint reports, the body camera records, the traffic camera footage from last night, and the officers' false reports. "Before we begin," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice calm but firm, "I want to thank Officers Brady and Thompson." The room fell silent in confusion. The 2 officers looked up, surprised. "Last night," Marcus continued, "these officers showed us exactly why we need major police reform in our city. They didn't know they were dealing with a city council member. They thought I was just another citizen they could humiliate, and that's exactly the problem." He pressed a button, and the large screen behind him came to life. The traffic camera footage started playing, showing the entire incident from last night from multiple angles. The room watched in stunned silence. "Today," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, "we're not just going to discuss two officers who abuse their power. We're going to talk about every officer who thinks a badge gives them the right to humiliate citizens. We're going to examine every complaint that was ignored, every body camera that mysteriously malfunctioned, and every false report that was filed." Looking directly at Officers Brady and Thompson, Marcus added, "And we're going to start with last night." The room was completely silent now, every eye fixed on Marcus. The next few hours would change the city's police department forever, and everyone in the room could feel it. The meeting was about to begin, and justice was finally going to be served. Marcus picked up the first file on his desk, his movements deliberate and calm. The room remained silent, filled with tension as thick as the previous night's snowfall. The local news cameras whirred softly in the background, recording every moment. "Let's start with Officer Brady's report," Marcus said, his voice clear through the microphone. "According to this, you pulled me over for a routine traffic stop and suspected I was intoxicated. Is that correct, Officer Brady?" Brady shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His dress uniform suddenly seemed too tight around his neck. "Yes, sir. That was my professional judgment at the time." Marcus nodded and pressed another button. The large screen behind him showed the traffic camera footage from the previous night. The image was crystal clear, showing Marcus's car driving perfectly within his lane, following all traffic rules. "Interesting," Marcus said, "because the traffic camera shows I was driving perfectly normally. No swerving, no speeding, no broken taillight." He turned to face Brady directly. "Would you like to revise your statement?" Before Brady could answer, Marcus pulled out another document. "And Officer Thompson, in your report, you state that I volunteered to do exercises in the snow. Is that your official statement?" Thompson's face had turned pale. The young officer looked at his superior, Chief Williams, who sat red-faced in the front row, then back at Marcus. I may have misremembered some details." A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus played the video from a bystander's phone, showing Brady ordering him to do push-ups while Thompson recorded and laughed. The sound of their mocking laughter filled the chamber. "Misremembered?" Marcus repeated quietly. "Like you misremembered to turn on your body cameras? Like you misremembered to follow proper traffic stop procedures?" Mary walked in and handed Marcus another file. He opened it and addressed the whole room. "In the past 5 years, these two officers have had 17 civilian complaints filed against them. Want to know how many were properly investigated? 0. Chief Williams stood up, his face now purple. "Mr. Chen, with all due respect, this seems like a personal vendetta because of one unfortunate incident." "One incident?" Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that silenced the chief. "Let me ask the room." He turned to the crowd. "How many people here have experienced similar treatment from our police department?" Slowly, hands began to rise. First a few, then more, until nearly half the room had their hands up. The news cameras panned across the crowd, capturing every raised hand. "Each hand represents a story," Marcus continued. "Stories of humiliation, abuse of power, and fear. Stories that were ignored or dismissed until now." He pulled out another document. "This is a proposal for immediate police reform. It includes mandatory body camera usage with strict penalties for non-compliance, civilian oversight of all complaint investigations, and immediate suspension for any officer found abusing their power." Brady and Thompson sat slumped in their chairs, their earlier arrogance completely gone. Chief Williams had stopped trying to defend them and was staring at his shoes. "Officers Brady and Thompson," Marcus said, "you have 2 choices. You can resign immediately, or we can continue this investigation, which will include reviewing every complaint against you, every traffic stop you've made, and every report you filed." The room held its breath. Brady, who had seemed so powerful last night in the snow, now looked small and defeated. Thompson was visibly sweating despite the room's cool temperature. "I will resign," Brady said quietly, his voice barely reaching the microphone. Marcus nodded. "A wise choice." He turned to Chief Williams. "Chief, your department needs cleaning up. Either you can lead that change, or we can find someone who will." The chief nodded stiffly, knowing his own job was now on the line. Marcus picked up the police reform proposal. "Committee members, it's time to vote. Last night showed us what happens in our city under cover of darkness. Today, we bring everything into the light." One by one, the committee members raised their hands in support. The vote was unanimous. As Marcus gathered his papers, he caught sight of his father sitting quietly in the back of the room. The old police captain gave his son a small, proud nod. Sometimes justice needed a push, or in this case, 30 push-ups in the snow, to finally be served. The news of Officers Brady and Thompson's resignation spread through the city like wildfire. By late afternoon, every local TV station was running the story, showing clips from the committee meeting alongside the viral video of Marcus doing push-ups in the snow. Marcus sat in his office, watching the coverage on a small TV while responding to hundreds of emails. People from all over the city were sharing their own stories of police harassment. His inbox was flooded with messages of support, more complaints about other officers, and thank you notes from citizens who finally felt heard. "Mr. Chen?" Mary called from the doorway. "The mayor is here to see you." Mayor Roberts walked in, looking tired and worried. Unlike his usual confident stride, he moved cautiously, like someone approaching a sleeping lion. "Marcus, we need to talk about what happened today." "Yes, we do," Marcus replied, turning off the TV. "But first, I want you to see something." He opened his laptop and showed the mayor a spreadsheet. "These are all the civilian complaints filed against our police department in the last year," Marcus said. "Over 300 cases, and only 8 were properly investigated." The mayor sank into a chair, loosening his tie. "I had no idea it was this bad." "Nobody did," Marcus said, "because nobody wanted to look." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the crowd of reporters still gathered outside City Hall. "But now everyone is looking." His phone buzzed. Another message from his father. The retired police captain had been receiving calls all day from his old colleagues, some angry, some supportive. "The good officers are thanking you," his father's message read. "They've wanted change for years." A knock on the door interrupted them. It was Sarah, Marcus's wife, carrying a fresh suit in a garment bag. She had been his rock through all of this, proud of what he was doing but worried about the backlash. "The press conference is in an hour," she reminded him gently. After setting down the suit, she squeezed his hand. "You're doing the right thing." Marcus changed into the fresh suit while the mayor paced nervously. "The police union is threatening to fight back," Mayor Roberts said. "They're saying you're on a witch hunt." "Let them," Marcus replied, adjusting his tie. "We have evidence, we have witnesses, and most importantly, we have the truth. It's time for real change." Just then, Mary rushed in with breaking news. 2 more officers from another precinct had resigned after citizens shared videos of similar abuse. The movement was spreading. At exactly 5 p.m., Marcus walked out to face the crowd of reporters on the City Hall steps. Camera flashes lit up the early evening darkness like lightning. Microphones were thrust toward him from every direction. "Last night," Marcus began, his voice strong and clear, "I experienced what many of our citizens have faced for years. But unlike many of them, I had the power to do something about it. Today, that changes." He held up a thick document. "This is the new police reform bill that has been drafted and approved in record time. This is just the beginning. We're establishing a new civilian oversight board with real power. Every complaint will be investigated. Every officer will be held accountable." The reporters shouted questions, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. "To the good police officers who serve our city with honor, we support you. To those who abuse their power, your time is over." In the crowd, he spotted Officer Thompson's wife crying quietly. Marcus felt a moment of sympathy. Actions had consequences, and families often paid the price. But he remembered the countless other families who had suffered because of police misconduct. "Change isn't easy," he continued, "but it's necessary. Starting tomorrow, we begin training our police force in de-escalation techniques. Body cameras will be mandatory and checked daily. Community engagement will be required, not optional." As he finished speaking, someone in the crowd started clapping. The applause spread until it echoed off the city hall walls. In the back, Marcus saw his father standing straight and proud, like he used to stand in his police captain's uniform. The sun was setting behind the city buildings, casting long shadows on the steps. But unlike the shadows of last night, these shadows weren't hiding abuse of power. They were marking the end of an old era and the beginning of a new one. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more resistance, and more work. But tonight, standing on those steps, Marcus Chen knew that sometimes the worst experiences could lead to the best changes. 6 months had passed since that cold winter night when Marcus Chen was forced to do push-ups in the snow. The city had changed in ways that even he hadn't expected. On a warm summer morning, Marcus stood at the podium in the police academy's graduation hall. Before him sat 50 new police officers, trained under the reformed system he had helped create. Behind them, proud families filled the seats, and among them sat former officers Brady and Thompson. The two former officers hadn't disappeared after their resignation. Instead, something unexpected had happened. 3 months ago, Brady had reached out to Marcus with a surprising request. He wanted to help train new officers on what not to do. Thompson had joined him, and together they now shared their story as a powerful lesson about the abuse of power. "Look at the person sitting next to you." Marcus began his speech. "That person isn't just your fellow officer. They're your conscience, your witness, and a reminder of what good policing means." The new graduating class looked different from previous years. There were more women, more minorities, and every single one had gone through extensive community service as part of their training. They had worked in homeless shelters, youth centers, and elderly homes before ever touching a badge. 6 months ago, I stood in the snow, humiliated by officers who had forgotten their true purpose. Marcus continued. Today, I stand here proud to see officers who understand that a badge is not a weapon, but a symbol of trust. In the front row, Chief Williams nodded. He had surprised everyone by embracing the reforms after the initial resistance. He had become one of their strongest supporters, firing 12 officers for misconduct and promoting others who showed true community leadership. Mary, Marcus's assistant, walked up and handed him some papers. They were the latest statistics, hot off the printer. Marcus smiled as he read them to the crowd. In the past 6 months, civilian complaints have dropped by 70%. Community trust in police has increased by 65%. Response times have improved, and most importantly, both citizens and officers report feeling safer. Brady shifted in his seat, his face showing a mix of shame and hope. His teenage son sat next to him, watching the new officers with admiration. Thompson's wife, who had cried at the press conference 6 months ago, was now smiling, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder. But the most important change, Marcus said, isn't in these numbers. It's in the stories I don't hear anymore. Stories of fear, humiliation, and abuse of power. Instead, I hear new stories of officers helping elderly citizens with groceries, playing basketball with neighborhood kids, and truly serving their community. Marcus's father sat in the back, wearing his old police captain's uniform. He had been instrumental in designing the new training program, sharing 40 years of experience about what good policing really meant. "Today, as you receive your badges," Marcus continued, "remember this. Power isn't measured by how many push-ups you can make someone do, or how much fear you can instill. True power comes from how many lives you can improve, how many people you can help, and how much trust you can build." The ceremony concluded with something new. Each officer took an oath, not just to uphold the law, but to serve the community with respect, dignity, and compassion. As they received their badges, each one was paired with a civilian advisor who would work with them during their first year. After the ceremony, Brady approached Marcus. "Mr. Chen," he said, looking down at his feet, "I never properly apologized for that night. What we did, it was wrong. Thank you for turning it into something good." Marcus shook his hand. "Sometimes our worst mistakes can lead to the best changes." As Marcus walked out of the academy building, he saw two of the new officers helping an elderly woman cross the street with her groceries. On another corner, an officer was showing neighborhood kids how to use the patrol car's radio. His phone buzzed. Another city had called, wanting to learn about their reform program. The changes they had made were spreading, creating ripples far beyond their city limits. That night, as snow had turned to summer stars, Marcus drove past the spot where he had done push-ups 6 months ago. A new community police center stood there now, its windows warm and welcoming. Inside, officers and citizens sat together, not as powers and subjects, but as partners in making their city better. Sometimes, Marcus thought, 30 push-ups in the snow could change the world, or at least start the process.